Morning, Steph.
Morning, hi everyone. I hope you all had a good summer. I know you probably haven't seen me for a while, but I'm back now and had a lot of things going on. So I hope you've all had a good summer and welcome back, really.
Yeah, it's really good to be back with you, Steph. Summer's just been crazy and employers just bonkers busy. There seems to be a lot of vacancies out there and not enough people at the moment. So it's interesting times. So we just need more and more people to start working in SEN. And I'm just hoping that us doing these blogs again is going to start raising awareness of how people can get involved in working in our sector. So today's vlog is about disability awareness and inclusion within the classroom. And I know, as a disabled person yourself and someone that lives with a disability, this is something you have been through when you were in education. So just thought it'd be really, really good for you to put your spin on this and to give your advice and hints and tips. So I've got a couple of questions that we can go through along the way. So if you're happy to get going.
Yeah, that is fine.
Fab. Okay, so I guess the whole point of disability awareness is to ensure that everyone is becoming educated and aware of individuals with disabilities so that everyone can be treated as equal. And I think it's that there's so many different areas though, isn't there, in terms of the legislative changes that have come into play, which is great, but there's still a lot of work to do to ensure that attitudes are changed and we're creating awareness and creating that acceptance of others.
Yeah.
So I know there's one area you wanted to touch on, and that's about bullying. So if you want to start on that, that would be brilliant.
So basically, I obviously I have a physical disability, cerebral palsy, I'm a wheelchair user, and I started off my educational career in the special schooling sector. But then from the ages of 8, I was introduced to the mainstream schooling sector, and even though I'm quite thankful for that, because I don't think I would be where I am today without that early intervention, I did have a lot of negative experiences within the mainstream schooling environment, especially in primary and secondary school, where I was a victim of bullying, where I was quite horrifically bullied on a number of occasions by some of my peers, classmates, and that was really difficult for me. It sort of impacted how I've grown up my early adulthood years, because like when I was like in my late teens, early 20s, I was quite closed off. I wasn't very open to being part of with people my own age, part of peer groups.
So you felt excluded because of the way that you were being treated?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because,
do you think this is because there's a distinct lack of knowledge amongst children and young people about disability? Because I think that can really negatively and hugely adversely impact their attitudes towards people with a disability if they just don't understand.
Yeah, because exactly, I would agree to that perfectly, because when I was at school, inclusion wasn't very openly encouraged.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I had a support worker and I wasn't allowed to sit with any of my peers in the classroom environment. So I had to just sit on a table with my support worker. And during break time and lunch times, all the children with SEND or wheelchair users or who had a varied of learning needs or disabilities, we were all put in a room during break time and lunch times, so we weren't able to go out into the playground and, you know, play with our classmates and peers, because the support staff would say from a health and safety point of view, then that wasn't really accessible. We didn't really have enough staff in order to watch us, make sure we're safe and stuff. And I completely agree with health, and I know that people have to follow health and safety regulations. It's part of their everyday jobs, it's part of everyday life, you know, but there is a point where you become too protected. And I think if we become too protected, then these children with SEND and disabilities are in danger of becoming too isolated and too protected. So in like later on in life, they haven't got the skills and the knowledge to mix in everyday society, really.
I think giving them the confidence to be able to just have that freedom as well, to obviously keeping themselves safe and for people to keep them safe, but also to let them have that independence will increase their confidence. And I think it also enables this whole, you know, sort of people being completely inclusive. I think children need to be curious and they need to ask questions, because that's how they're learning. So I don't think children should be stopped from asking, you know, what's wrong with you? Why do you do that differently? I think that's wonderful. I think it's great that children are invited to ask these questions these days, because that is how they do learn. So I think with regards to the bullying then, I think in a classroom environment, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Steph, but maybe we could sum it up as the educators need to recognise when children are being socially excluded. And educators, those people in charge, need to ensure that the provision is put in place to ensure that exclusion isn't happening, and appropriate resources and interventions need to be put in place to prevent that.
Yes, of course. Like, it was really interesting because I read your blog on the Sempli website about tips, you know, to encourage like inclusion, and that just has to start from a very young age, whereas you know, children should be encouraged to mix with children with SEND. So like if you're doing a group activity in the classroom, you know, encourage children to include the SEND children. So if you see somebody sat on their own and not being included, you know, go over to them and include them. And when it's interesting, you mentioned the part where children should be encouraged to ask questions and stuff, which I've done that in the past, you know, about in my early 20s, and I'd still be open to do that this now if any schools were willing to work with me on this, where I did a series of disability awareness talks within schools within the Greater Manchester area, because that's where I live. But I could do, you know, virtual sessions as well as face-to-face sessions, in-person sessions, where I did a number of assemblies, class talks with year groups and children, and they talked about my experiences of bullying, you know, what it was like growing up. And after that, I did a question and answer session where, like, I encouraged children and staff to, like, ask me some questions of anything they wanted to know, and that was really well received. You know, like a lot of the children did ask a lot of questions, and I did try to answer as many questions as best I could, and that's where it all starts of better understanding, you know, awareness sessions to make children more aware of what's going on and why this person, you know, has these difficulties and other abilities. You know, we need to celebrate these people and these children, you know, and
differences need to be celebrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's about having disability role models as well, and you're certainly a role model.
Yeah.
In, you know, with what you do, Steph. So I think, you know, we look at the Paralympics, and we look at comedians who have a disability, and they're just, there's no difference between someone who has a disability and someone who doesn't have a disability. It's all about being equal completely, and letting everyone have those rights to do what they want to do. So I think, you know, to sum that up, I think in terms of the in terms of the bullying side of things, you know, clinicians, educators and children with disabilities, they need to be involved in the development of disability awareness programs and plans. They're the people that are living it, and get everybody involved. I think it's really, really important. And let's start it with this sort of these awareness sessions and the education sessions. And I think that brings us on quite nicely to talking about the mental health aspect of, you know, a child, a young person that has been excluded within their classroom, how that can affect their mental health. And obviously mental health is massively prevalent at the moment within society. So I just want you to sort of talk about a little bit how mental health is affected by being excluded within that classroom.
Obviously, mental health is such a big thing, like we've just said, in today's society, and certainly being excluded from a very young age within a classroom setting does have a really negative impact on that child's mental health, especially as we're getting older. It's like, you know, somebody who identifies as LGBTQ plus, for example, that's another issue that I'm really passionate about raising awareness about, and disability taboo subjects, because I do feel that these subjects are issues that are there, but they're sort of brushed under the carpet, they're not openly discussed about. So like when we talk about, like, you know, like mental health, it does have a negative impact. Like, for example, like because I was because I always had to go out to a school outside the area because of the area from which I live, because not all schools were accessible, and that still is the case today with some schools. And so that sort of excluded me again, because like from my place, if they were going on weekend shopping trips or trips to the cinema, I couldn't go because I didn't live in their area.
Okay.
And so that did really impact my mental health and stuff, and like it really impacted my mental health as well because of relationships, especially when you get to them teenage years where you're experiencing, you know, your first girlfriend, your first boyfriend, or whatever. You know, that was really hard for me because I've always wanted to experience a romantic relationship and talk about sex and sexual health, and but it's just having that right platform and like talking about them issues. And I know it can be quite embarrassing for some parents as well with children with SEND, but you know, the children are going to grow up curious, and as we grow up to the teen years or early adulthood years, then we need to approach them sort of subjects about sex and relationships and LGBTQ plus and other things, sexual health, with an open mind. So it's about you know, training these parents and professionals and aiding them with the tools to ensure that they feel comfortable when approached by the children and young people that they're supporting.
I agree, and I think it's all about sort of breaking down those societal barriers, isn't it, to making a positive transition for children into teens, and then teens into young adults, into adulthood. And I think at each one of those phases, there's so many different professional sectors, professional bodies and teams that are involved during those phases. It just needs to be streamlined, and it needs to be as seamless as possible. But I think also what's really important is that the rights and views of the children and young people and their families are understood, And it's about ensuring that those disabled people do have that voice when it comes to that transition into their adulthood. And that very much starts from the classroom in ensuring those children feel confident to be heard and to be able to make their voice heard. So just bringing it back to the mental health side of things. And again, I think there's a massive dependency here on the educators playing an important role in identifying when there's something not right with those children. And I think it comes down to the training that they have, and they really need to be having inclusion focused training and support that includes mental health. So it's looking at mental health as potentially a section within that inclusion, massive wide topic of inclusion, and having a real specialist area of mental health training within there. And again, I think starting that from the outset when children start school is really, really important.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, definitely inclusion training, you know, if any professionals want to work with me, then they can do. Schools, psychologists, you know, social workers, any professional that works within the education or classroom environment sector, then I will be more than happy to work with them, because it's much easier to listen to somebody with lived experience than somebody who's just reading it out of a textbook, because lived experience is really important, and it's very important, coming in my opinion, that we like give these people with lived experience a platform and a voice that isn't necessarily accepted to be heard, but we should be more freely heard by more sectors of the communities.
Absolutely. And what I really like at the moment, and I can speak from experience of my daughter, she's at mainstream school, and at her school, she's at secondary, and they focus on a wider curriculum. So it's not just about your maths, your English, your science, your history. They teach them every week about the broader aspects of growing up, and it's about respect, empathy, and they do a module on community, aspiration, well-being, leadership. And I really like that it's bringing lots of different skills and elements into a classroom environment. And I think all of this works towards this whole inclusive environment and ensuring that everyone is equal, because we are, excuse me. So I think that's really important. I think we've raised some very, very good points there today, Steph, and I really value your actual lived experience that you're able to contribute towards these sessions. Is there anything else you want to add, Steph?
Just that, you know, inclusion, it's important that inclusion and disabilities in SEND should be celebrated and not something that's excluded and shied away from it. So it's about having open conversations with all sectors of society, no matter what age or background they're from, and just giving disabled people, if they have got the capacity to have a voice, that should be heard and celebrated.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for today's session, Steph, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Take care.